She was already walking away when the woman in his bed laughed. Not nervously, not startled. She laughed the way someone laughs when a plan works exactly as intended. Low, satisfied, unhurried. And that sound, more than anything Zuri Adeyemi saw in that hotel suite, is what broke something inside her chest that has never fully healed since. She was 3 months pregnant. She had flown 14 hours to surprise her husband. She had an ultrasound photo tucked against her heart. And the woman who laughed was still touching the dragon tattoo on Kang Tae-hyun's collarbone when the photo slipped from Zuri's fingers and hit the marble floor. Tae-hyun didn't move, didn't call her name, didn't take a single step toward the door she was already closing behind her. That silence cost them 3 years, 1 daughter, and a war neither of them wanted. If you've ever loved someone completely and still felt completely alone, stay with me. This one is going to hurt before it heals. Hit the like button if you're already feeling something. Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because the stories we bring you don't end quietly and you don't want to walk in late. Now, let's go back to the beginning of the night everything fell apart. The flight from Lagos to Seoul took 14 hours and 20 minutes, and Zuri Adeyemi spent most of it rehearsing what she would say. She had practiced in the bathroom mirror of the Economy Plus seat. She'd upgraded last minute, couldn't justify business class on her curator's salary, not when Tae-hyun was already paying the rent on their Seoul apartment, and she was already sensitive about that. She'd rehearsed with her hands around a paper cup of lukewarm tea. She'd rehearsed again when the cabin lights dimmed and everyone around her fell asleep, while she sat there wide awake with the ultrasound picture folded twice inside the breast pocket of her jacket, pressed against her ribs like something she needed to protect. She was going to say, "I have something to show you." She was going to watch his face. She was not a woman who cried easily. Her mother had told her once, not unkindly, that Zuri felt things the way rivers feel their banks, quietly and from the inside. But she had cried in the doctor's office, not from fear, from something she didn't have a clean word for. The pregnancy had been unplanned. They had been married 8 months. Kang Tae-hyun was not a man you planned things with. He was a man things happened around, and you adjusted. That was the marriage. That was the honest version of it. She had fallen in love with him anyway. She knew what he was. She was not naive about the empire he ran, the reach of it, the violence underneath the smooth surface, the way rooms changed temperature when he entered them. She had told herself, in those early months, that she could hold the two things at once, love the man, refuse the world he operated in. She had believed that was possible. She still half believed it on the plane. The surprise had been her idea. He'd been in Seoul for 3 weeks on what he called business. She had stopped asking for specifics 18 months ago, not because she didn't want to know, but because the answers had a way of sitting in her chest for days afterward, heavy and unresolved. She missed him. It was as simple as that. She missed him, and she was pregnant, and she wanted to see his face when he found out. She took a cab from Incheon Airport instead of calling the car service. She wanted to arrive unannounced. She even felt something almost girlish about it, showing up at the hotel with a secret worth keeping. The city was cold, February cold, that particular Seoul winter cold that comes off the Han River and finds every gap in your coat. She pulled her jacket tighter and watched the city blur past the cab window and thought about the expression he would make. Tae-hyun was not a man who showed his feelings easily. That was not a criticism. It was simply who he was, contained, controlled, every emotion governed by the same discipline that governed everything else in his life. But she had learned to read the small things, the way his jaw relaxed when he wasn't aware of it, the half-second delay before he answered a question he actually cared about. Once, early in their marriage, she had shown him a painting she'd acquired for the gallery, a large abstract piece from a young Senegalese artist she'd been championing for 2 years. And for 3 full seconds, Tae-hyun had stood in front of it and said nothing, and she had understood, from the quality of that silence, that he found it genuinely beautiful. He had not said so. He had looked at her afterward and asked what she was going to name it for the catalog listing. She told him she hadn't decided yet. He said, something with water. She had loved him, fully, for the first time in that moment. The hotel was one of those places that didn't have a sign visible from the street, the kind of exclusive that announced itself by being invisible to everyone who wasn't supposed to be there. She knew it because Tae-hyun had brought her once, 2 years ago, for a dinner that involved 8 courses and a conversation she was clearly not meant to follow. She remembered the lobby, white marble, low lighting, the particular silence of enormous wealth. The man at the front desk recognized her. She was the wife. She didn't need a keycard explained to her. He handed her a spare with a small bow and didn't ask questions, and she took the elevator up without thinking about what she might find. Because why would she think that? Why would she need to? The hall on the 22nd floor was quiet. Her heels were low. She'd learned that lesson early. You don't wear heels on marble that could kill you if you slipped. And her footsteps were almost soundless as she approached the suite. She wasn't trying to be quiet. She simply was. She used the keycard. The door opened. And the first thing she heard, before she saw anything, before her eyes adjusted to the dim interior light of the suite, was a woman's voice saying something in Korean, low and warm and intimate, in the tone people only use in small spaces they consider private. Zuri's hand was still on the door. She took one step inside. 2. The woman was sitting on the edge of the bed in a white robe, leaning toward where Tae-hyun sat shirtless at the edge of the same bed, and her fingers were resting on the dragon tattoo beneath his left collarbone. The one Zuri knew by heart, the one she'd traced on their wedding night while he slept, the one that started at his shoulder and curved down toward his ribs, like something with its own gravity. The woman's fingers were on that tattoo. Her body language said she'd touched it before. Her body language said she had every right. Tae-hyun looked up. His face did the thing she had never seen it do. A flicker of something she couldn't name, too fast and too controlled to catch cleanly. His mouth opened. The ultrasound photo was in her hand. She didn't remember taking it out of her pocket. Her fingers had moved without her permission, the way your body sometimes acts on a script your mind hasn't written yet. It slipped. She heard it hit the marble. She heard the sound clearly, that flat, small sound, completely out of proportion to what it meant. The woman looked at the photo on the floor and then looked up at Zuri and smiled. Not embarrassed, not startled, not sorry, and laughed. Low and satisfied and unhurried. The laugh of someone watching a plan land exactly where it was aimed. Tae-hyun said her name. One word. The shape of it in his mouth, Zuri, was the same shape it always was when he said it, but it arrived too late. Everything arrived too late. She turned around. She walked back down the hall. She pressed the elevator button once. She stood with her back to the suite door while she heard, distantly, his voice behind it. Not raised, not panicked, just her name again, twice, 3 times. And the elevator arrived and she got inside and the doors closed and she stood in the mirrored box looking at her own face and tried to understand what had just happened to her life. She was 3 months pregnant. She was alone in an elevator in Seoul. The ultrasound photo was still on the floor of his suite. She pressed lobby. The lobby attendant saw her cross the marble floor toward the revolving door and said something polite in Korean. She didn't hear him. The cold outside hit her like a wall, and she stood on the sidewalk for a full 30 seconds before she remembered that she needed to move, that standing still was not a plan, that she was going to have to figure out what happened next because nobody was going to figure it out for her. She called a cab. She did not cry in the cab. She looked out the window at the city moving around her and felt the cold seeping in at the window sill and pressed one hand flat against her stomach under her coat. Not dramatically, not consciously. Just the way you press a hand against something that needs protecting. The driver asked in English if she needed anything. He'd probably seen enough foreign women in the back of that cab to know the face she was wearing. She said no. She said thank you. She said she was fine. She was not fine. But she was still making decisions, which meant she was still functioning, which meant she had time. She needed time. She needed to think without his voice in the room, without the image of that woman's hand on his skin, without the memory of that laugh still sitting in her ears like a splinter she couldn't reach. She went to the airport, not on impulse. She sat in the cab and she thought about it clearly as she could with her chest caving in, and she made a decision. She would not wait in the hotel room they kept for her visits. She would not call her sister in Lagos and cry through an international call and then feel obligated to explain what she had seen and field everyone's advice about a situation they couldn't fully understand. She would not sit across from Tae-hyun in some restaurant in 48 hours and listen to him explain something she wasn't sure she wanted explained. She had watched her mother stay. She had watched her mother take the explanation. She had watched her mother spend 12 more years in a marriage that still ended badly, just more slowly. Zuri was not her mother. She bought a ticket at the counter with a credit card in her own name. She had always kept her own name and her own accounts. That had been her one absolute condition when they married. And she waited 4 hours in the international terminal, and she kept her phone face down in her lap the entire time. It rang. She knew it was him. She watched it vibrate against her thigh and did not pick it up. She had a daughter growing inside her who had never heard that laugh, never seen that hotel room, never been old enough to have her heart broken by it. She was going to keep it that way. The flight home felt nothing like the flight there. She didn't rehearse anything. She sat in the window seat and looked at clouds and let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. Not the crying kind of weight, just the dense, settling kind, like concrete setting inside your ribs. She cataloged what she knew for certain. She had seen what she had seen. She had heard what she had heard. The woman had not looked ashamed. Taehyun had not come after her. That last one mattered more than she wanted it to. If she had misunderstood something, if there were an explanation that changed the picture entirely, he would have come after her. He had resources she couldn't imagine. He had people in every major airport in Asia. He could have found her in that terminal if he'd tried. He didn't come. That, she told herself, was the only answer she needed. She was wrong. She would not know how wrong for 3 more years. Back in Lagos, she moved deliberately and without wasted motion. She called her cousin Adayeze, who had the kind of face that asks no questions until you're ready to answer them, and stayed in her spare room for 2 weeks while she figured out her next move. She contacted her bank and quietly redirected her accounts. She called her gallery director and said she was dealing with a family matter and would be remote for the foreseeable future. She did not contact Kang Tae-hyun. He contacted her, every day for the first 3 weeks. Calls, messages, eventually a letter. She felt the weight of it in the envelope and did not open it for 9 days. And when she finally did, it was a single page in his handwriting, dense and controlled even on paper, asking her to come back, asking her to listen, saying there was something she had not understood. The word please appeared once, halfway down the page. She had never seen him write that word before. She stood in Adize's kitchen, holding the letter and reading it 3 times, and then folded it back along its original creases and put it in the drawer with the ultrasound photo. She kept the photo. She didn't know why. Maybe because it was the only thing from that trip that had been entirely honest. At 14 weeks, she moved into her own apartment. At 16 weeks, she told Adayeze the truth. Not all of it, but enough. At 20 weeks, she stopped waiting for something she couldn't name to change, and she started building what came next. She registered the baby under her surname. She found a midwife she trusted. She began quietly building a new professional identity. Consulting rather than directing, remote rather than in person, mobile enough to stay off the radar of a man whose radar was international and relentless. She was under no illusions. He would look for her. He might find her. But she had a head start, and she had the simple advantage of being willing to disappear, and she intended to use it. The night before she gave birth, she sat on the floor of her apartment. The furniture hadn't fully arrived. She was surrounded by boxes. With her back against the wall and her hand on her stomach, and she made herself a promise. The child she was about to have would grow up without fear, without the weight of an empire, without learning, too young, what kind of world her father had built and what it had cost. She would give her daughter ordinary. She would give her safe. She would give her Lagos in the morning with the windows open, no bodyguards at the door. Her daughter arrived on a Tuesday in May, 7 pounds 4 ounces, with a pair of lungs that registered a formal complaint about the entire situation immediately. Zuri held her in the dim light of the delivery room and looked at the baby's face, the shape of the eyes, the particular line of the brow, and felt something slide through her chest that wasn't grief, but was close enough to grief's neighbor that it stopped her breathing for a moment. She named her Amani. It means peace in Swahili. She chose it on purpose. Outside the window, Lagos was waking up. Traffic. A vendor calling something in the street. The particular light of early morning in a city that never fully sleeps. Zuri held her daughter and did not cry. She pressed her mouth to the baby's forehead and felt the small warmth of her and thought, this is enough. This is already more than enough. She believed it. She was still learning. The first year passed the way first years do when you are surviving. Unevenly, in stretches, with small victories and larger exhaustions, and occasional moments of pure, uncomplicated joy that made the rest of it worth the wait. Amani was a serious baby, observant in a way that made the midwife comment on it, watching the room from behind her enormous dark eyes like she was taking inventory. She rarely cried without reason. She slept in reliable stretches. She regarded strangers with a calibrated skepticism that Zuri recognized privately as a family trait. The gallery work picked up. Zuri had always been good at the work, not just the curation, but the relationships, the slow, careful business of earning an artist's trust, and then taking that trust into a room full of people with money and making something happen. She built a client list that was modest at first, then grew. She traveled twice to London, once to New York, always with Amani in care with Adayas, and a very specific set of instructions about who was and wasn't allowed near the apartment. She thought about him less than she expected to. Or she thought about him differently. Not the longing kind of thinking, but the reckoning kind, the sorting through what happened kind. She thought about the person she'd been in that marriage, the ways she'd shrunk, and the ways she'd held her ground, and the ways she'd told herself the shrinking was a choice, when really it had been slow drift. She thought about the letter sometimes, the single please in his handwriting. She always put that thought away before it became a question. Amani turned one, then two. She learned to walk with the aggressive confidence of someone who has decided falling is simply part of the process. She learned her first words in English and Yoruba simultaneously, which delighted Ades and made Zuri's heart do something complicated that she didn't examine closely. She was careful. She stayed careful. She moved apartments once, not in fear, just in caution. She kept her professional profile clean and visible, her personal life invisible. She told Amani that her father was someone she loved who lived very far away, and that when Amani was older there would be more to explain, and Amani at 2 accepted this with the same inventory-taking calm that she accepted most information. The photograph arrived on a Thursday afternoon in early spring when Amani was 3 years and 4 months old. Zuri came home from a client meeting, let herself in, put her bag down on the kitchen counter, and turned around to call for Amani. And stopped. There was a photograph on her pillow. Not an old one. Not something from before. It was recent, taken from some middle distance. She could tell by the lens compression, and it showed Zuri leaving the gallery she worked out of on Tuesdays, holding Amani by the hand, both of them mid-step, neither of them aware of the camera. On the back, in handwriting she recognized immediately, "Found you," 2 words. Her phone rang 20 seconds later. She picked it up because her hands moved before she decided to let them. His voice was the same. 3 years, and it was exactly the same. Quiet, controlled, the kind of voice that could deliver any kind of news in the same steady register. He said, "Don't be afraid." She said nothing. He said, "I know you're standing in the apartment. I know Amani is next door. I know you're looking at the photograph." She said quietly, "You've been watching us. I found you 8 months ago." A pause. "I've been watching to make sure you were safe." "That's not—" She stopped. Started again. "That is not your decision to make." "No," he said, "it isn't." A silence that had 3 years inside it. Then his voice again, still quiet, still even, still that same voice she had loved in a hotel room in Seoul while the city was dark outside, and she'd believed completely that they were building something worth keeping. "She has my eyes," he said. Not a question. Zuri stood in the bedroom of her Lagos apartment with the photograph in her hand and her daughter's sounds coming from the next room. Amani talking to her stuffed animals in that bossy, decisive way she had, and felt the 3 years collapse into something much smaller and much heavier than she'd thought she was carrying. She had been so careful. She had been so certain that careful was enough. "What do you want?" she asked. Her voice came out steady. She was grateful for that. He said, "I want to explain something that happened in a hotel room 3 years ago." She said, "I know what happened." "No," Kang Taehyun said, and for the first time in 3 years his voice cracked, just slightly, just at the edge of the word. "You don't." She didn't hang up. That was the first mistake, or maybe it wasn't a mistake at all. Maybe it was the only honest thing she did in those first 60 seconds. Her thumb hovered over the red button and she stood there in her bedroom with the photograph in her hand and Amani's voice carrying through the wall, talking to a stuffed elephant named Baba in that solemn instructional tone she used when she was explaining the rules of something she'd invented, and Zuri did not press end call. "You don't," he said again. quieter the second time. Then explain it. Her voice came out flat. Not cold, flat, the way a surface goes flat when all the texture has been pressed out of it by pressure. You have 30 seconds. I need more than 30 seconds. That's not my problem. A pause. She heard him exhale. Not dramatically, just the breath of someone adjusting to a room that isn't what they expected. I'm in Lagos. Every muscle in her back went rigid. I've been here 4 days, he said. I haven't come to the apartment. I gave you the photograph because I needed you to know I was here before I showed up at your door. I didn't want to frighten you. Leaving a photograph on my pillow inside my locked apartment is not a reassuring alternative. I know. How did you get in? That's not the point. How did you get in, Tae-hyun? The name came out wrong. It came out the way it used to 3 years ago, when she was frustrated with him, and her frustration still had intimacy in it, and she felt her jaw tighten at the sound of her own voice. One of my people has a skill set, he said carefully. Nothing was disturbed. Amani wasn't, don't say her name. Silence. Not yet, Zuri said. You don't get to say her name yet. He accepted that. She didn't know what to do with the fact that he accepted it. That he didn't push back, didn't deploy the particular contained authority that used to make rooms rearrange themselves around him. He simply stopped. Where are you? She asked. Victoria Island, the Echo Hotel. Of course. She almost laughed. He couldn't do ordinary even when he was trying. I'll meet you, she said. Tomorrow morning. A coffee place near the gallery. I'll send you the address. You come alone. No people in the corners, no cars outside, no one watching the door. If I walk in and anything feels off, I leave and we're done. Not paused. Done. Understood. And Tae-hyun. She waited a beat. If you ever send someone into my home again, I will call every journalist on 3 continents who has ever wanted to write about Kang Tae-hyun's private life. Do you understand me? A pause that had a different quality than the others. Yes. She ended the call. She stood in the bedroom for a moment, perfectly still, and then she sat on the edge of the bed and pressed both hands flat against her thighs and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way the midwife had taught her during labor when the contractions were stacking too close together and she needed to stay in her body instead of leaving it. She was angry. She was also something else, something she didn't have a clean word for and wasn't going to examine tonight. Mama. Amani appeared in the doorway, 3 feet tall, holding Baba the elephant by one ear, with the casual brutality of a child who has never considered the structural limits of stuffed animal ears. She looked at Zuri with those eyes, that particular shape, that particular directness, and Zuri felt the breath go out of her. Hi, baby. Baba is sick, Amani announced. He needs soup. Okay, Zuri pulled herself back into her body completely. Let's make him soup. She made soup for a stuffed elephant and put her daughter to bed and sat at the kitchen table until midnight, and she did not let herself think about what came next until she had decided what came next. The coffee place was called Nourish. It was deliberately unimpressive. Mismatched chairs, local roast, the kind of place that a man whose security team operated on 3 continents would never choose for himself and would therefore be exposed in, conspicuous in the way powerful people are conspicuous when stripped of their architecture. She chose it on purpose. She arrived 12 minutes early and took a table against the wall with sightlines to the door. He arrived exactly on time. She had told herself she was prepared for it, seeing him, the physical fact of him in the same air she was breathing. She had been wrong about being prepared. He was the same. That was the problem. It was almost entirely the same. The controlled way he moved, the contained quality that made him seem like he was taking up exactly the amount of space he'd decided to take up, no more. He was wearing a plain dark jacket, no tie, no visible security. He scanned the room once when he entered, quickly and without being obvious about it, and found her in the same sweep. He walked over. He pulled out the chair across from her. He sat down. He looked at her for a moment without speaking, and she looked back, and she refused to be the one who looked away first. You look well, he said. Don't. She set her coffee cup down. Don't do the polite version. We don't have enough time for the polite version, and I don't have enough patience. He nodded. All right. Talk. He did. He laid his hands flat on the table, so she noticed they were empty. No phone, no envelope, nothing. And he talked. The woman's name was Park Ji-soo. She was the eldest daughter of Park Sung-jin, the head of a competing syndicate in Busan that had been trying to negotiate a merger with Tae-hyun's organization for 3 years. The merger would have meant territorial expansion, consolidated resources, a combined operation that would have effectively controlled the eastern seaboard of Korea. It would also have required Tae-hyun to dissolve his existing marriage and take Park Ji-soo as his wife, cementing the alliance in the traditional structure these organizations had operated under for generations. He had refused, twice. Formally, through channels, with language that left no room for reinterpretation. Then Zuri found out she was pregnant, Zuri said, watching his face. He blinked. What? I found out I was pregnant the week before I came to Seoul. That's why I came. That's why I didn't call first. She held his gaze. I want you to know that so you understand what I was carrying when I walked into that room. Something moved across his face and went still again. It was fast enough that she might have missed it, but she knew his face and she didn't miss it. I didn't know, he said. I know you didn't. A silence opened up between them. The coffee shop was filling up around them, 2 men arguing pleasantly about football near the window, a woman typing furiously on a laptop by the door, a child pulling her mother's sleeve, and none of it touched the pocket of quiet at their table. Jisoo bribed 2 members of my hotel security, he said. She had a key card made. She knew my schedule because someone inside my organization sold it. His voice stayed even. She noticed the effort it took to keep it that way. She arrived 40 minutes before you did. She was in the suite when I returned from a meeting. I told her to leave. She didn't. A pause. I was calling security when you opened the door. You didn't move, Zuri said. He stopped. I watched you. You didn't take one step toward me. I know. He looked at the table for a moment and then back at her. I made a calculation, a wrong one. I thought if I went after you in the hall with her still in the room, it would look worse. I thought you'd stop. I thought you thought I'd wait. Yes. I don't wait, she said quietly. You knew that about me. I knew it, he said. I forgot it. She picked up her coffee cup. Her hands were steady, which surprised her. Show me. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a USB drive on the table between them. Surveillance footage from 2 cameras in the hall outside the suite, time-stamped. Jisoo arriving 42 minutes before you. The call log from my phone showing the security call I was placing. He reached into the other pocket and placed a folded sheet of paper beside it. Financial record. Wire transfer from Park Sung-jin's personal account to a name I can give you. The amount correlates to the bribe paid to my security team. Another sheet. A signed testimony from one of the men she bribed. He's no longer employed by me, and he has nothing to gain from lying. Zuri looked at the items on the table. She did not touch them. Why didn't you send these 3 years ago? I did. His voice was careful. The letter I sent had copies. You didn't open it for 9 days, and then you disappeared. She felt something cold move through her chest. She thought about the letter in the kitchen drawer, the letter she had read 3 times and folded back up and filed under things she had decided not to need. I didn't... She stopped, restarted. There were no copies in the letter. He looked at her steadily. There were 3. The noise of the coffee shop pressed in around her. Someone laughed near the window. A chair scraped. She sat with her hands around her cup and looked at the man across from her and felt the architecture of the last 3 years begin to shift in ways she was not ready for. She had read that letter 9 days after she received it. She had read it 3 times. She had not been in a condition, at that point, to handle anything carefully. She had been 14 weeks pregnant and furious and certain and exhausted. Had she missed something? Had she read it the way you read something when you've already decided what it says? She looked at the USB drive on the table, the folded sheets of paper. I'm not asking you to decide anything today, he said. I'm not asking you to forgive me for not coming after you in that hall, because you're right, and I was wrong, and that's not something evidence fixes. He paused. I'm asking you to look at what happened, what actually happened, because you left believing something that wasn't true, and I spent 3 years knowing that, and... His voice stopped for 1 second, one controlled, deliberate second. And I have a daughter I've never met, and she has my eyes, and I would like the chance to not be a stranger to her. If you decide after everything that you don't want to rebuild what we had, that is your right, and I won't contest it, but I need you to make that decision with the correct information. Zuri sat with that for a long time, long enough that the table of football-arguing men finished their coffees and left, long enough that the light coming through the front window shifted. She picked up the USB drive. She did not pick up the paper documents, just the drive. She turned it once in her fingers. "I'm going to look at everything," she said. "Every piece of it. I'm going to have someone I trust independently verify what can be verified." She set the drive in her palm. "And then we're going to have a second conversation. And in that conversation, you are going to answer every question I ask without managing the answer. Not the curated version, not the version that makes you look best." She looked at him directly. "The real version." "Yes," he said. "And Taehyun." She waited until she had his full attention, which with Taehyun was always total and slightly uncomfortable. "Whatever happens between us, whatever I decide, she is mine. Her life, her schedule, what she knows and when she knows it, how she's raised. Those decisions are mine. You will have the role I allow you to have and not 1 inch more. Are we clear?" "We're clear." "Good." She put the drive in her bag. She stood up and put on her jacket. "Don't come to the apartment. Don't send anyone to watch us. If you want to know how we are, you call me." She picked up her bag. "And answer when I call." She walked out without looking back because looking back had never helped her once in her life, and she was trying to remember that lesson. The verification took 11 days. She gave the drive to a man named Kolade, who worked in Lagos's informal technology economy and had once recovered a hard drive for her gallery director that everyone said was unrecoverable. Khaled was thorough and discreet and asked no questions about context. He confirmed the timestamps on the surveillance footage were unaltered. He cross-referenced the metadata. He ran the financial records through 3 different verification processes and delivered his results in a manila envelope with the kind of straightforward certainty that comes from someone who deals only in what the data says and not what anyone wants it to mean. Zuri sat at her kitchen table on a Tuesday night after Amani was asleep and read Kalade's report in its entirety. Then she sat in the dark for a while. She thought about a hotel room in Seoul and the sound of a woman's laugh. She thought about an elevator and the particular feeling of the city moving outside a cab window. She thought about a letter in a kitchen drawer that she had read, convinced she already knew what it said. She thought about 14 hours on a plane rehearsing what she would say to a man who was, according to everything in front of her, innocent of the things she had spent 3 years being certain of. She wasn't crying. She was too tired for crying, and the feeling she had wasn't grief-adjacent anymore. It was something more complicated, something that implicated her, and she was honest enough not to look away from that. She had left. She had chosen to leave before she knew the full picture. She had made the decision that protected herself and her daughter, and she could not entirely call that wrong because she'd had no way to know, at the time, what she didn't know. But she had also chosen, 9 days later, not to open the information that might have changed everything. She had filed it under things she had decided not to need because needing it would have required her to undo a decision she'd already committed to, and she had not been willing to do that. She sat with that for a long time without letting herself off the hook for it. In the morning, she called him. He answered on the second ring. "The footage is authentic," she said. "The financial record checks out. The timeline is consistent with what you told me." A beat. "I know. I'm telling you I verified it independently. I know why you're telling me." Another beat. "Thank you." She felt the word land awkwardly, the way words land when they're filling space that used to be occupied by something else. "We need to talk again. Not about the evidence, about what comes next." "Yes. There are things I need to say to you that aren't about that night." She looked at the window, morning light, early birds, Lagos traffic starting up. "About the marriage, about what it was and what I needed it to be. I'll listen to whatever you need to say." "I know you will." She paused. "That was never the problem. You always listened." She pressed her lips together. "The problem was what happened after the listening." Silence. "Come to the apartment Saturday morning," she said. 9 o'clock. Amani will be there." She heard him take a breath. "She doesn't know who you are. I haven't told her anything that would need to be undone if this goes wrong. So Saturday is not a reunion. Saturday is a stranger being introduced to my daughter. You will take whatever she gives you, and you will not push for more. If she ignores you completely, you sit with that, and you don't make it about you. Understood?" His voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. "Understood." She came to him on Saturday morning, 15 minutes before 9, and stood outside her apartment building watching him arrive. He came alone, as promised, no car idling at the curb, no figure in the peripheral trying to be invisible. And she watched him stop on the sidewalk in front of the building and just stand there for a moment, looking at the door. She had never seen Kang Tae-hyun stand in front of a door and need a moment. She had seen him walk into rooms where people feared him without altering a single thing about his breathing. She had seen him take a call that she knew, from the controlled quality of his face, was about something catastrophic, and finish the call and put the phone away and continue a conversation with her about something ordinary without skipping a beat. He stood in front of her apartment door and needed a moment. She looked away to give him that. She came down and let him in. He followed her up the stairs without speaking. He wore dark trousers and a gray sweater, and he was not carrying anything. No gift, no offering. And she respected that. The gifts would have been wrong. She hadn't told him to come empty-handed, but she was glad he'd understood it without being told. She opened the apartment door. Amani was in the living room sitting cross-legged on the rug in front of her collection of small rocks, which she organized and reorganized on a regular basis according to systems that Zuri had never been able to decode. She looked up when they came in with the flat-lidded, inventory-taking expression that was her standard response to any new variable in her environment. She looked at Tae-hyun. He looked at her. For a moment, the apartment held only that, a 3-year-old girl and a man who had run a criminal empire and been feared by people who didn't fear many things, regarding each other across a living room floor. Amani looked at Zuri. "Who's that?" "His name is Tae-hyun," Zuri said carefully. "He's someone I know from a long time ago." Amani looked back at Tae-hyun with the unnerving directness of a child who hasn't yet learned the social contract that says you shouldn't stare at people. "Why is he nervous?" Tae-hyun blinked. Zuri pressed her lips together and said nothing, because there was nothing to say to that. He lowered himself, slowly, carefully, as if the floor were something that required negotiation, until he was sitting cross-legged on the rug, approximately 3 feet from Amani's rock collection. At his full height, he had always commanded a certain compression of space around him. On the floor, he was simply large and slightly awkward, and trying very hard not to show that he was trying very hard. "What are those?" he asked. He nodded at the rocks. Amani regarded him with the expression of someone deciding whether a question deserves an answer. "My collection." "What kind?" "All kinds." A pause. She picked up a white one with gray veins. "This one is quartz. Mama got it from a market." She held it out toward him, not giving it, just presenting it for inspection. He leaned forward and looked at it seriously. "This one is the most important," she added. "Why?" Amani considered this. "Because I said so." He looked at the rock for another moment. "That's a good reason," he said. And Amani, apparently satisfied with this answer, went back to organizing her collection with the focused solemnity of someone conducting critical work, while Tae-hyun sat on the floor of the apartment 3 feet away and said nothing else, and didn't push, and didn't perform. And Zuri stood in the kitchen doorway watching this, and felt something inside her crack open quietly, without drama, without announcement. The visits happened twice a week. She set the terms. 2 hours, always at the apartment, always while she was present. He came every time. He was never late. He never brought gifts without asking first. He sat on the floor. He let Amani dictate the terms of every interaction, what they talked about, what they did, how close he was allowed to sit. She kept him at arm's length for 3 weeks, and then, one Saturday, brought him a rock she'd found outside and placed it in his hand without explanation and went back to her collection. He held that rock like it was made of something fragile. Zuri watched him from the kitchen, and she was not ready to name what she felt, but she acknowledged it was there. 2 weeks after that, Arez came by unannounced. Arez had never once knocked in her life, and walked in to find Tae-hyun on the floor building a block tower with Amani and Zuri at the kitchen table with her hands around a coffee cup, watching. Arez looked at the scene. She looked at Zuri. She raised both eyebrows to a height that communicated an entire paragraph. She went to the kitchen and poured herself coffee and sat next to Zuri and said, very quietly, "You want to tell me what is happening in your living room?" "Not particularly," Zuri said. "He's been here before." "Several times." Arez watched him for a moment. He was attempting to explain structural engineering to a 3-year-old who kept removing load-bearing blocks to see what would happen. He was remarkably patient about it. He was also increasingly terrible at hiding that he was finding it funny. He looks at her like she hung the moon, Adeyeze said. I know. And how does he look at you? Zuri was quiet for a moment, like he's waiting for something he's not sure he deserves. Adeyeze made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Zuri, don't. I'm not saying anything. You're saying everything, you're just not using words. All I'm going to say, Adeyeze said, setting her cup down, is that you have spent 3 years building a life where nobody gets too close. And that is understandable. But there is a difference between protecting yourself and building a wall so high you can't see what's on the other side anymore. Zuri did not respond to that because she had no response that was honest and several that were defensive, and she had enough self-awareness to know the difference. That night, after Amani was in bed and Taehyun had gone back to the hotel, he'd extended his stay indefinitely without making it her problem, which she noted. Zuri sat at her kitchen table with the USB drive and the verified documents and the letter she'd kept in the drawer for 3 years, and she read the letter again. All of it. More slowly than the first time. The 3 copies of the evidence were there. They had always been there. She had read the letter in a state of furious, pregnant certainty, and her eyes had gone over them, and she had processed them as manipulation, as the paper version of a man scrambling to control a narrative, and she had folded the letter back up and filed it away. She sat with what that meant about her. She was not a woman who let herself off the hook easily. That had always been her character, the willingness to look at her own part in things, even when her part was smaller than someone else's, even when acknowledging it was painful. She had made a choice with incomplete information, and then, when complete information became available, she had chosen not to receive it. She was not the villain of the story. She knew that. The staged betrayal was real. The fear that drove her away was real. The need to protect her daughter was real and right. But she had also held on to a version of events that let her stay the wronged party without complication, and she was honest enough to call that what it was. She put the letter away. She picked up her phone. She started to text him something simple. Tomorrow, bring coffee, we need to talk. And then stopped. Deleted it. Looked at the ceiling. There was a sound from Amani's room, not crying. Amani rarely cried in the night. Just a small movement, the particular sound of a child resettling in sleep. Zuri listened to it and thought about what Adeyeze had said about walls. She picked the phone back up. She typed, Tomorrow, coffee. I have things to say that aren't about the evidence. I think you should hear them before we go any further with this. She sent it. 3 seconds later, I'll be there at 8. She set the phone face down on the table and sat in her kitchen in the quiet of her Lagos apartment, and for the first time in 3 years she let herself think, without immediately suppressing it, about who they had been together before the hotel room. Not the marriage as it had been at the end, careful and slightly pressurized and full of things neither of them was saying, but at the beginning, when she'd shown him a painting and he'd stood in front of it in silence and then said something with water, and she had understood completely. She let herself think about that. Then she thought about the woman in the white robe and the satisfied laugh and the sound of an ultrasound photo hitting marble. Both things were true. She was going to have to hold both things at once. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling, and her mind kept returning to one detail she hadn't been able to put down since the coffee shop. The fact that Park Ji-soo had known. Whoever staged that scene had known the specific night, the specific hotel, the specific timing. They had known Zuri was flying in from Lagos, which meant someone had known she was coming before she arrived, which meant someone had been watching her before she even landed. 3 years ago. She lay still in the dark and felt the shape of that thought and followed it to its edge, and what she found at the edge was not reassuring. If Park Ji-soo had known in advance that Zuri was flying to Seoul that night, if she'd had that information before Zuri's flight even landed, then the betrayal was not improvised. It was not a coincidence of timing. It was targeted, at her specifically, which meant Park Ji-soo knew something about the pregnancy, or someone who knew about the pregnancy had told her. Zuri sat up in the dark. She had told 2 people about the pregnancy before she got on that plane. Her doctor, who was bound by confidentiality, and the woman who had recommended the doctor, a mutual connection she and Taehyun shared, a woman she had considered a friend, someone embedded quietly in the edges of that world who had always presented as safely outside the political architecture of it. a woman named Hana Seo. Zuri sat upright in her bed in the Lagos dark, and the shape of what she was looking at shifted into something much larger and much colder than a hotel room in Seoul, and a woman who had laughed at the right moment, and she understood, in the particular way you understand something when your body knows it before your mind finishes the sentence, that whatever had happened 3 years ago was not over. It had been waiting. She didn't sleep after that. She lay in the dark for another 20 minutes running the logic. The way you run a calculation, you're hoping will come out differently the second time, and it didn't. The arithmetic was the same every way she approached it. Hanaseo had known about the pregnancy. The stage scene had required advanced knowledge of Zuri's travel. The only person outside her doctor who had that information was Hana, who had been the one to recommend the doctor, who had been present in a casual, unremarkable way at the edges of their marriage for 2 years. Dinners, gallery events, the kind of social proximity that doesn't announce itself as strategic because it isn't supposed to. Zuri got up at 5 in the morning and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and wrote down everything she remembered about Hanaseo. She did this the way she approached difficult acquisitions at the gallery, without feeling, just inventory. Hana was Korean, mid-30s, worked in cultural liaison between Seoul and various West African arts communities, which was how they'd met. She spoke 4 languages. She had an apartment in Seoul and claimed a second address in Accra. She was warm in the specific way of someone who has learned warmth as a professional skill. She always knew things slightly before other people did. Gallery news, industry gossip, the quiet movements of significant people, and Zuri had always attributed that to her network, to the particular connected quality of someone who lived in multiple cities and had a foot in multiple worlds. She wrote all of this down. Then she wrote, she recommended Dr. Oluwafemi. She was the one who suggested I see him specifically. She asked 2 weeks later if I'd been in for a checkup. Zuri had answered yes. She had not said why. But she had answered yes, and Hana had smiled and said something about women needing to take care of themselves, and Zuri had thought nothing of it. She put the pen down and looked at what she'd written. Then she picked up her phone and called Taehyun at 5:17 in the morning. He answered immediately. Not groggy, not delayed. He answered like someone who had not been asleep. Hanaseo, Zuri said. A silence that lasted exactly 2 seconds and told her everything. You know that name, she said. Yes. How long have you known? Zuri, how long? His breath came through the line. 18 months. We confirmed it 18 months ago. The kitchen went very quiet. She could hear the refrigerator hum. She could hear traffic beginning outside. She sat with the phone against her ear and felt something cold move through her that wasn't anger yet. Anger would come. She could feel it building somewhere below the surface, like pressure behind a door. But right now it was just cold, clean and cold. You've known for 18 months, she said, that Hanaseo fed information to Park Jisoo, that she helped set up what happened in that hotel room, that she was the one who told them I was coming. A pause. And you didn't tell me. I found you 8 months ago. 8 months ago. She set her coffee cup down carefully so she wouldn't slam it. You found us 8 months ago. You knew at that point the full picture of what happened and who was involved. And in those 8 months, while you were watching us to make sure we were safe, while you left a photograph on my pillow, while you sat across from me in that coffee shop and told me to verify the evidence, you knew about Hana and you didn't say it. I was going to... When? Her voice came out even. She was proud of that and furious that she had to be proud of it. When exactly were you going to tell me that the woman who recommended my obstetrician was working for the people who destroyed our marriage? After you trusted the evidence, after the visits were established, I didn't want to... He stopped. To what? To hand you another crisis before you'd process the first one. The cold in her chest cracked, and the heat came through. That was not your decision to make. That information involved my safety, Amani's safety. Hanaseo has been in my life for 3 years, Taehyun. She sent a gift when Amani was born. She has been to this apartment. Zuri's voice was shaking now, and she stopped for a moment to stabilize it. She has been inside these walls. I know. He sounded exhausted. Not the tired of someone who hadn't slept, but the tired of someone who had been carrying something heavy in the wrong direction for a long time. I know, and I'm sorry. I made a judgment about sequencing that wasn't mine to make. And I am sorry. Is she still in Lagos? She left 2 months ago. She's in Seoul. Is she working for Park Sung-jin? A pause. She was. The relationship appears to have ended. We believe Park Sung-jin considers the objective achieved and has moved on. She is not currently a threat to you. You believe. You appear to have. She pressed the heel of her hand against her eye socket. You're telling me you believe and appear to have, and you want me to take that as a reassurance. I'm telling you what I know and being honest about the limits of what I know. Come here, she said. Not at 8. Now. Another pause. It's 5 in the morning. I'm aware of what time it is. Come here. She was dressed and had made a second pot of coffee by the time he arrived 20 minutes later. She let him in without a word, and he came inside and stood in the kitchen doorway, and she looked at him, genuinely looked, the way she hadn't let herself since the coffee shop, and she saw what she hadn't wanted to see. He looked like a man who had been right about something important, and it had cost him every night's sleep since. She poured him coffee and set it on the table and sat down. He sat across from her. Tell me everything, she said. Not the managed version. Everything. He told her. It took an hour. He laid it out the way someone lays out something they've assembled piece by piece over a long time. The investigation into the hotel security breach. The first lead that pointed toward Park Sung-jin's finances. The connection that eventually surfaced between Hana and Jisoo. The wire transfers. The communications intercepts. The full picture of how a plan had been built and executed over the course of 6 months, specifically to neutralize Tae-hyun's refusal of the alliance. Hana had been recruited 18 months before the hotel. She'd been placed deliberately. The introduction to Zuri had been engineered through a mutual contact who didn't know they were being used. The goal had been simple. Find the vulnerability in Tae-hyun's life that he would not sacrifice for the empire. They had identified Zuri inside the first 3 months. The rest was patience and access. When Zuri told Hana's recommended doctor she was pregnant, and the appointment note found its way through the clinic's administrative network, a network that had one compromised employee, Hana had the information within 48 hours. She sent it to Jisoo. Jisoo built the final stage of the plan around it. Come to the suite. Be there when the wife arrives. Make it look unambiguous. Let her draw her own conclusions. Rely on the fact that a woman 3 months pregnant, catching what she believes is her husband's infidelity, will not stop to interrogate the staging. They had understood exactly how much Zuri loved him. They had built the weapon out of that love and aimed it precisely. Zuri sat across from him and listened to all of it and did not interrupt. She held her coffee cup with both hands and kept her breathing even, and she listened. When he finished, she said, "Where is Hana now? Specifically." "An apartment in Mapo District, Seoul." He looked at her carefully. "Zuri, I'm not going to do anything to her," she said flatly. "I'm not you. I want to know because I need to understand the geography of what happened to me." She set the cup down. "Does she know that you know?" "Yes. We made that clear 8 months ago." "How did she respond?" Taehyun's jaw worked for a moment. "She said it was business, that it wasn't personal." Zuri thought about the gift Hana had sent when Amani was born. A hand-embroidered blanket, yellow and white, with a card that said, "For the beginning of everything." She thought about the warm, professionally calibrated smile. She thought about it wasn't personal. She stood up and went to the window. Lagos was fully awake now. The street below had its morning volume. Motorcycles, vendors, someone's radio carrying through the warm air. Ordinary, clamorous, indifferent to anything happening in this kitchen. "I need you to leave," she said. "Not permanently. I need you to leave right now so I can think without you in the room." "All right." He stood. He didn't argue. He picked up his jacket from the chair. "Taehyun." She didn't turn from the window. "The visits continue. Saturday is still Saturday." A pause. "But you and I, whatever we're building here, that has to go slower now. Because you made a choice to manage my access to information about my own life, and that is a thing I need to sit with." "I understand." "Do you?" She turned then. "Because in that marriage, the thing that wore me down wasn't the empire. It wasn't the danger or the secrecy or the weight of knowing what you were. It was this. It was you deciding what I could handle and when. It was you curating the version of reality you gave me." Her voice was steady and she kept it that way. "I can't go back into that. He held her gaze for a long moment. You won't. You say that now. I know. He put his jacket on. I also know that telling you that isn't enough. I know you need to see it over time. He moved toward the door and stopped. I should have told you about Hana the day I sat across from you in that coffee shop. That was wrong. I won't ask you to minimize it. She nodded once. He left. She stood at the kitchen window for a long time after she heard the downstairs door close. Then she went to check on Amani, who was still asleep on her back with her arms flung wide in the total surrender way she slept, and she stood in the doorway of her daughter's room and looked at the small person in the bed and felt a love so uncomplicated and ferocious that it was almost painful, and beneath it, quieter and less clean, the beginning of a fury that she understood was not finished with her yet. She went back to the kitchen and opened her laptop. She searched for Hana Seo, not to do anything, just to look, just to put a current face to the shape of what had happened. The search pulled up a professional profile, cultural liaison, Seoul arts community, a recent panel appearance at a symposium, smiling in the photograph, warm, accessible. The precise presentation of a woman who moved through spaces by being trusted. Zuri stared at the photograph for a long time. Then she closed the laptop. She had bigger problems. Because if Park Sung-jin's operation had been sophisticated enough to plant someone in her life for 18 months, patient enough to wait for the right weapon, and precise enough to deploy it at the exact moment it would cause maximum damage, then the conclusion of that operation had not been the hotel room. The hotel room had been a move in a game that was still being played. She called Tae-hyun back. He picked up on the first ring. Is it over? She said. Park Sung-jin. The alliance he wanted. The war your refusal caused. Is any of it actually over? The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted them. No, he said. It's not. She had known, from the silence, before he said it. Tell me what's happening. This is not something I want to discuss on Tae-hyun. The fury she'd been holding below the surface finally made contact with her voice, and she let it, controlled but present. I am done being managed. Tell me what is happening, he told her. The war between his organization and the Park Syndicate had never formally ended. After Zuri disappeared, Tae-hyun had poured everything into finding her. Resources, people, attention, and Park Sung-jin had read that as weakness and had moved aggressively. 2 of Tae-hyun's eastern territories had changed hands. 3 of his senior people had been pressured out of their positions through a combination of legal exposure and personal threat. The organization was smaller than it had been and operating under constant pressure from 3 directions simultaneously. Coming to Lagos had not been a strategic retreat. It had been a tactical pause in a situation that was actively deteriorating. How bad is it? She asked. Manageable, for now. That's not an answer. It is an answer. It's just not the reassuring kind. Another beat. Park Sung-jin knows I'm in Lagos. He doesn't know why yet. My people have managed the information. But he knows I'm here and not in Seoul, and that creates a window for him. She sat down. He'll use it. Probably. When? I don't know. Soon. She pressed the heel of her hand to her forehead and stared at the kitchen table. And Amani and I are not known to him as a specific location. The surveillance I kept on you was clean. No traces. He paused. But if he finds out I'm in Lagos because of you, because of her, that changes the calculus. We become leverage. Yes. The words sat between them on the phone line like something dropped. She had spent 3 years building a life that was safe. She had been meticulous about it. She had been careful in ways that had cost her. The isolation, the controlled perimeter around their lives, the deliberate smallness of her social world. She had paid that price willingly because the alternative was what she was now sitting inside, the understanding that careful had a ceiling and she had just hit it. I need to see everything, she said. The current picture, the active threats, the timeline as you understand it. I need to see it because if Amani and I are inside this situation, which we apparently already are, whether I consented to that or not, then I am not navigating it blind. That's a significant amount of, I know what I'm asking for. Zuri. His voice shifted into something she hadn't heard before. Not the controlled register, not the managed tone, but something unguarded and direct. If I show you what this looks like from the inside, you cannot unsee it. The scope of it, the people involved, the methods. It is not a pause. It is not a world I want you inside. I'm already inside it. She looked toward Amani's door. The apartment was quiet, morning settling around her. I've been inside it since I married you. I was just inside it with the lights off. She breathed. Turn on the lights. He came back at noon. He brought 2 of his people. She had said no people, and she let this go, because the material they brought required handling, and she was too pragmatic to refuse the pragmatic thing. They set up a secure laptop on her kitchen table, and for 3 hours she sat and looked at what Kang Tae-hyun's world actually looked like, when stripped of the careful presentation he'd always maintained for her benefit. It was worse than she'd thought and better than she'd feared, which she understood was not a comforting calibration, but was nonetheless the honest one. The Park Syndicate's push was real, but not yet critical. The timeline was compressible, weeks, not days, and there were strategic options that hadn't been exhausted. But one thing became clear as she worked through it. The reason Tae-hyun was in Lagos was not just because he wanted to meet his daughter. He was in Lagos because Seoul had become genuinely dangerous for him in the short term, and proximity to Zuri and Amani, people Park Sung-jin didn't yet know about specifically, was, structurally speaking, his cleanest blind spot. She understood this at 2 in the afternoon, in the middle of him explaining a territorial arrangement, and she put her hand up and stopped him. You came here because it was safe, she said. He went very still. Not only because of us, not even primarily because of us. She kept her voice neutral because she needed to understand before she reacted. You came here because Lagos is outside the active theater, and Zuri Adeyemi's apartment in Victoria Island is a location your enemies don't have on any map, and you needed somewhere to operate from while you figured out your next move. He held her gaze. He did not look away, and he did not immediately deny it. It was both, he said. It was both things simultaneously. It was never only one. But the timing, she said, the 8 months you spent watching us before you made contact, was any part of that timeline determined by the situation in Seoul? By what was happening with Park Sung-jin? A long pause. The kind that answers the question before the words do. Yes, he said. She pushed back from the table. She stood and she walked to the kitchen window and she stood there with her back to him. And she breathed through it, the way she'd breathed through the contractions, counting and steady, and not allowing herself to leave her body, because leaving her body right now would be the end of any conversation that needed to happen. He had come. He had wanted to come. He had found them and spent 8 months watching, and then he had made contact, and all of that was real. She did not believe any of it was cynical. She did not believe she and Amani were merely a tactical resource to him. The way he sat on that floor, the way he held that rock. But the timing had been shaped, at least in part, by pressure from another direction. And he had not said so. She heard him stand. She heard him take a breath. Zuri, he started, don't. She pressed one hand flat against the window frame. Don't explain it yet. Let me think. He was quiet. To his credit, he was quiet. She thought about 3 years of building a life on the premise that she had seen clearly and responded accordingly. She thought about the letter in the drawer. She thought about Hanaseo's warm professional smile. She thought about a man who had omitted Hana's involvement for 8 months because he'd decided she couldn't handle it, and who had been shaped, in his timing, by forces he hadn't disclosed. She thought about a 3-year-old girl in the next room who had given a relative stranger a quartz rock because he'd given her a good enough reason. She thought about all of that. Then she thought, what are the actual options? Not the emotional options, not what felt right or wrong. The practical, sequential, what happens next options. Option 1. She told him to leave, reassembled the perimeter, went back to the careful and controlled life she'd built. Possible, but the perimeter had a ceiling she'd already hit. Hanaseo had breached it years ago without her knowing, and if Park Sung-jin found out about Lagos, about this apartment, about Amani, without Tae-hyun here to deploy whatever network he deployed, she had no counter. Option 2. She stayed inside the current situation with full information and full agency, and stopped pretending that being uninformed was the same as being protected. She turned around. I want 2 things, she said. Non-negotiable. He looked at her and waited. First, I want complete information from this point forward. Not the version you've decided I can process. Not sequenced for my comfort, If something is happening that affects my daughter's safety, I hear it immediately. No lag, no filtering. She held his gaze. If you cannot do that, we are done. And not just romantically. As co-parents, as anything. I will take Amani and I will go somewhere you cannot find us. And I will mean it. He nodded once. And the second? If this situation with Park Sung-jin escalates to the point where we become a specific target, if your presence here puts us in the frame, you pull back. You leave. You do not martyr yourself in my kitchen, and you do not use us as a shield, even passively. She took a breath. Our safety is not subordinate to your strategic position. If it becomes a conflict, there is no conflict. You leave. He stood across the kitchen from her, and she watched him measure it. The real weight of what she was asking, which was not just an agreement but a restructuring of every instinct he'd ever operated on. Yes, he said. Both of them. Yes. She nodded. She was about to say something, she hadn't decided what, when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. It was a Lagos number she didn't recognize. She answered it because unknown numbers had stopped being ignorable 3 years ago. The voice on the other end spoke in accented English. Korean accent, she registered that immediately, and registered the strangeness of that, a Korean accented voice on a Lagos number, and said 3 words before she could speak. He found you. She looked at Tae-hyun. His phone was already in his hand. He had a text on the screen that she could see from across the kitchen. She couldn't read the Korean characters, but she could read his face, and his face had done the thing she'd never seen it do before. Not the hotel room flicker, something different. Something she had no reference for because she had never seen Kang Tae-hyun afraid. Who is this? She said into her phone. The voice said, Hana. Zuri's hand tightened on the phone. He sent people this morning, Hana said. Her voice was flat and fast and stripped of all the warm, professional textures Zuri remembered. Park Sung-jin. 2 teams, Lagos arrival this afternoon. They know the apartment building. I don't know if they have the floor. A breath. I'm telling you because what I did to you was a pause. A small, inadequate pause. I'm telling you. Zuri lowered the phone. She looked at Tae-hyun. 2 teams, she said. Lagos. This afternoon. He was already moving, one hand to his ear, talking in rapid Korean, and the apartment that had been her careful, controlled, ordinary life for 3 years transformed in the space of 10 seconds into something else entirely. The air-changing quality, the way it changes before lightning, everything sharpening and narrowing to what was essential. And the only essential thing was the small room down the hall where Amani was waking up from her nap and calling out Mama in the high, clear voice of someone who had no idea yet what kind of world she'd been born into. Zuri was already moving toward her daughter's voice when Tae-hyun caught her arm, not restraining, just a point of contact. And she turned to look at him, and he said, very quietly, with the full weight of everything they were in the middle of pressing against both of them, I will get you out of this. She looked at him. I know, she said. And then, because it was true, and because they were past the point of leaving true things unspoken. That's not the part I'm afraid of. He held her gaze for 1 second. What part? He asked. What it costs you, she said. And she went to her daughter. Amani was sitting up in her bed with her hair pushed flat on one side and Baba the elephant tucked under her arm, blinking at her mother with the slow, serious expression of someone coming back from very deep sleep. Mama. Hi, baby. Zuri's voice came out even. She was proud of that and furious that she had to be proud of it again. She crossed the room in 4 steps and picked her daughter up, all 31 pounds of her, warm and heavy and smelling of sleep, and held her against her chest and felt the small hands grip her shoulders out of reflex. We're going on a little trip. Now? Right now. I'm not dressed. That's okay. She was already moving back toward the door, Amani on her hip. Baba can come. Tae-hyun was in the hallway with his phone still at his ear. He saw Zuri come out carrying Amani and something moved across his face, fast, complicated, not entirely controlled, and he turned away and kept talking. She caught fragments of Korean, the cadence of someone issuing instructions, the particular clipped authority of a man who ran things, and she took it in without comment because now was not the time for any of the things she felt about that. She went to Amani's room and pulled the emergency bag from the top shelf of the closet. She'd kept it packed for 3 years. Not in fear, she'd told herself, just in readiness. Change of clothes, documents, the USB drive she'd never stopped treating as essential, a small amount of cash in 3 currencies, Amani's vaccination records, 2 days of the medication her daughter took for a mild allergy. She checked it in 30 seconds by feel and slung it over her shoulder. She grabbed the stuffed elephant from the bed and tucked it into the bag. Back in the hall, Tae-hyun had ended the call. "Car is 3 minutes," he said. We go to the basement, not the lobby." "Where are we going?" "Safe house. Ikoi. My people have held it for 2 weeks. Different name. No connection to either of us." He looked at Amani, who was looking back at him with the inventory-taking expression from behind Zuri's shoulder. He looked away first. "It's clean." "How long has Park Sung-jin known the building?" "Unknown. Hana said that they have the building. Whether they have the floor or unit number is—" He stopped. "We treat it as compromised." "How many people do you have in Lagos?" 6. 2 outside, 4 staged near the safe house. She did the math without speaking. 2 teams sent by Park Sung-jin, a man who ran a syndicate large enough to have destabilized Tae-hyun's operation across multiple territories over 3 years. 2 teams could mean 4 people or could mean 12. Against 6 of Tae-hyun's people, 2 of whom were currently standing outside a building that might already be watched. "The 2 outside," she said. "Are they visible?" He understood the question immediately. "They'll withdraw before we move." "Don't withdraw them. Redirect them. Have them move toward the front of the building, active, visible. Draw the watch point to the front." She shifted Amani's weight on her hip. "We go out the back service exit." He looked at her for a moment. "Through the laundry corridor," she said. "I've used it before. The building manager props the door when the delivery service comes Thursday mornings. It connects to the side street." "It's not Thursday." "There's a drainage pipe access 2 doors down from the laundry exit that opens to the alley. I know because Amani's ball went down it 8 months ago and I had to get it out." She met his gaze. "I know this building. You've been watching it for 8 months. Neither of us has to know it perfectly. We just have to know it better than they do." 3 seconds of silence. "Okay," he said. "Tell your people." He was already on the phone. They moved through the apartment in the particular focused silence of people doing necessary things without ceremony. She turned off every light, not for any tactical reason, just the habit of someone who'd learned that ordinary details could be the thing that saved you, and she wasn't going to start making exceptions. She took a last look at the kitchen table, the laptop, the coffee cups they'd left, and she felt something that wasn't nostalgia but was adjacent to it, the recognition of a life she'd built carefully and was now walking out of its speed. She closed the apartment door. They took the stairwell instead of the elevator, Tae-hyun ahead, Zuri behind with Amani, who had assessed the situation with her usual inventory seriousness and decided the correct response was to grip Baba tighter and say nothing. They went down 4 floors without sound. At the landing between the 2nd floor and the basement, Tae-hyun stopped and held up one hand and listened, and Zuri stopped behind him and felt her heart rate in her throat and her daughter's breath against her neck and waited. Silence from below. He nodded. They went through the basement. The laundry corridor smelled like detergent and concrete and the particular warmth of industrial machines. Zuri knew the smell. She'd been down here 6 times, twice, to fix a building issue she'd been on the residence committee for, twice to use the industrial machines when her own was broken, twice when Amani had found the door interesting and she'd had to extract her. She moved through it without hesitation and found the service exit and pressed the bar and the door opened onto the side alley and the Lagos morning hit them. Heat, exhaust, the clamor of the city going about its business with complete indifference. She did not look back. The car was a gray sedan she didn't recognize, which was the point. The driver was one of Tae-hyun's people. She knew because of the way he registered their appearance without changing his posture. The trained neutrality of someone expecting exactly this scenario. Tae-hyun put his hand on the car door and opened it and stepped back for her, and she got in with Amani, and he got in behind her, and the car was moving before the door fully closed. Amani looked out the window with wide, calm eyes. "Are we going somewhere fun?" she asked. Zuri looked at her daughter, the 3-year-old face, the serious brow, the total composure of a child who had decided that her mother's steadiness was sufficient information about the situation. "We're going somewhere safe," Zuri said. Amani considered this. Is Tae-hyun coming? A small, completely involuntary silence opened up in the car. Yes, Zuri said. Amani looked at him across the seat with the directness that had stopped a mafia boss dead 3 weeks ago on a living room floor. Good, she said, with the decisive simplicity of someone whose logic is entirely their own, and turned back to the window. Tae-hyun looked at the back of the 3-year-old's head, and Zuri watched his jaw work once, and then go still. She looked away. The safe house was a 2-story in Ikoyi, behind a compound wall that looked like every other compound wall on the street. High, topped with faded metal, anonymous. Inside, clean, spare, maintained, but not lived in. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a main room with shuttered windows. 4 of Tae-hyun's people were already there, which meant the room changed temperature slightly when they entered it, that particular shift of alert bodies tracking new arrivals. They adjusted immediately, stepped back, made themselves peripheral. She noted that. Whoever these people were, they were trained for exactly this, and they understood that the presence of a child required a different register. She settled Amani in the smaller bedroom with Baba and a story she told from memory, the one about the tortoise and the birds, which she'd known since she was 7, and which Amani could not yet detect she was telling on a kind of autopilot, and came back out when the child's eyes had stayed closed for 3 full minutes. Tae-hyun was at the table with 2 of his people, looking at something on a tablet. He looked up when she came in. She's asleep, Zuri said. He nodded. He gestured to the seat across from him. She sat. What do we know? She said. 2 teams. First team confirmed at your building. Our people saw them arrive 40 minutes ago. 2 men. They've taken a position in the lobby. Professional. He set the tablet flat on the table so she could see it. A map of the neighborhood. Her building marked 3 other points. Second team, unknown location. Hana's information was partial. Where's Hana now? Seoul. She sent the message and went dark. We can't reach her. Zuri filed that. What does Park Sung-jin want? Tae-hyun looked at his people. They did not leave the room. They stepped back, which was the professional version of the same thing. He looked at her. He wants me to come back to Seoul, he said. He's been pushing for a meeting, formal, structured, to negotiate the territorial situation. I've declined twice. Coming here instead of answering was read correctly as a 3rd refusal. He paused. Sending people is the pressure he applies after a 3rd refusal. It's how he negotiates. You put something important to your opponent inside the theater of a threat, and you make them choose. So we're the negotiating chip. Yes. She looked at the map. She thought about the 2 men in the lobby of her building. She thought about an unknown second team somewhere in Lagos. She thought about Park Sung-jin in Seoul, operating on the logic of a world where people were leverage and patience was a form of violence. What's the play? She said. He looked at her for a moment. There was something in his face she hadn't seen there before, not even in the last difficult weeks. Something almost uncertain, which on Tae-hyun's face was as significant as a collapse on someone else's. I go to Seoul, he said. I take the meeting. I negotiate the terms myself without us as leverage. Without you as leverage. Yes. That's what he wants. If you go to Seoul to have the meeting he demanded through coercion, you've accepted the premise that coercion works on you. She kept her voice even. He'll use it every time. I know. His voice was careful. But if I stay and the second team has an opportunity, we're already in a safe house. Your people are here. Moving you to Seoul doesn't protect us. It reduces our protection and confirms his strategy simultaneously. She held his gaze. What's the other option? He was quiet for a moment. The other option, he said slowly, is something I've been considering for 6 weeks and have not said out loud. She waited. He put both hands flat on the table. He looked at them for a moment. Then he looked at her. I dismantle it, he said. The organization. Not piece by piece, not in retreat, deliberately, voluntarily. I contact Park Sung-jin's people and I surrender the territories he wants. I sign over the businesses. I remove every point of contention. He paused. He wins the empire. In exchange, this ends. Completely. The room was very quiet. You'd have nothing left, she said. I'd have something left. He held her gaze. She understood what he meant. She sat with it. If you do that, she said carefully, you become a private citizen. Someone who used to run something that no longer exists. You have money, personal holdings, I assume, separate from the organizational structure. Enough for a long time. But no protection infrastructure, no people, no network. She pressed on because this needed to be examined, not softened. If Park Sung-jin decides that a former rival is more dangerous alive than retired, he won't. Taehyun's voice was certain in the particular way of someone who has done the calculation many times. Park Sung-jin wants the empire. He has always wanted the empire. The man is irrelevant to him once the empire is gone. There is no strategic value in pursuing someone who controls nothing. A pause. I become boring to him. That is the most effective protection available. She sat with that. She thought about Adeyeze saying there is a difference between protecting yourself and building a wall so high you can't see what's on the other side. She thought about Amani in the next room with her elephant, sleeping inside the noise of all this with the total confidence of a child whose mother had never once given her reason to be afraid. She thought about what she'd said to him, what it costs you. Is this what you want? She said. Not what protects us, what you want. He looked at her for a long time. I want the thing I should have wanted 3 years ago, he said. The thing I had and didn't understand how to hold. His voice didn't crack. He controlled that. But the effort was visible, and she let it be visible. The empire is not what I want. I want to sit on the floor in a living room and have a 3-year-old hand me a rock and consider it the most significant thing that's happened to me in a decade. He paused. And I want to build something with you that doesn't have this underneath it. She looked at him. Make the call, she said. He made it. Not then. The logistics of what he was proposing required time, documentation, the involvement of people on multiple levels of a structure that didn't dismantle simply. But the call to Park Sung-jin's intermediary happened within the hour, from the safe house table, while Zuri sat across from him and listened. She didn't speak Korean, but she heard the shape of it, the controlled authority in his voice, the absence of concession in his posture, even as the words he was saying were, objectively, everything Park Sung-jin had pushed for. The intermediary called back 20 minutes later. Taehyun took the call, said 5 words she didn't understand, and ended it. He looked at her. Park Sung-jin accepts the terms. His people will withdraw from Lagos within 6 hours pending the formal documentation. 6 hours. She looked at the table, the map, the 2 points marking men sitting in the lobby of her building right now, waiting. And you trust? She asked. I trust that Park Sung-jin wants the documentation. He won't move against us before he has it, because if something happens to me before the transfer is completed, the whole thing falls apart. He paused. He's a strategist. He won't risk the outcome for the short-term satisfaction. She nodded. She stood and went to the kitchen and filled a glass of water and drank it. She stood at the counter and looked at the shuttered window and thought about the 6 hours between now and whatever came next. She heard him stand. She heard him cross the room. He stopped at the kitchen doorway, not coming in, just filling the space of it. Are you all right? He asked. She turned. I'm functional. That's not what I asked. She looked at him. The kitchen was small and the light was the indoor afternoon kind, flat and honest. And she looked at him with no distance left to manage the looking from. I'm afraid, she said. Not of Park Sung-jin, of what happens after. After the documentation, after the withdrawal, after you've given away the thing you built your whole life around. She paused. Who are you after that? I don't know, he said. I know who I want to try to be. That's a start, she said. A sound from the bedroom. Not distress, just Amani resettling. They both heard it. Both went still for a moment, heads slightly turned toward the sound, in the unconscious synchrony of parents who have been tracking a child's breathing. She looked back at him. I need you to go back in there, she said, with the map, the timeline, the team. I need you to manage the next 6 hours so that nothing goes wrong, because if you're standing here talking to me and something goes sideways because nobody was watching, you're right. He straightened. I'm going. He went. She stood in the kitchen for another minute. She finished the water. She put the glass in the sink. Then she went back to the table, pulled a chair next to Tae-hyun's, and looked at the map with him, because she had told him she would not navigate this blind. And she had meant it, and she was not a woman who said things she didn't mean. The 6 hours were the longest she'd lived in a long time and the most structured. Taehyun's people rotated positions. Reports came in at intervals. The two men in her building's lobby were photographed, identified through a network she didn't ask about, confirmed as Park Syndicate. The second team was located. A car on a street 2 blocks from her building, 2 more men, surveillance posture, not yet active. At the 4-hour mark, confirmation came through that Park Sungjin's formal response had been transmitted and the documentation process was underway. At the 5-hour mark, the car 2 blocks from her building left. At 5 hours 40 minutes, the 2 men in the lobby of her building walked out, got into a car, and did not come back. Taehyun's person watching the feed said something in Korean, and Taehyun said something back and the room shifted. That collective decompression of people who have been holding a specific shape of tension and can begin to release it. Zuri felt it in her own shoulders first, the specific way they dropped when she stopped monitoring whether they were dropping. Amani woke up at the 6-hour mark and came out of the bedroom with Baba, and her hair still flat on one side, trailing the small particular gravity of a child who has slept hard and come back from it unbothered. She looked at the room full of people. She looked at Taehyun. "I'm hungry," she said. He looked at her. He looked at Zuri. He looked back at Amani. "Me too," he said. Zuri watched him look around the safe house kitchen with the specific bewilderment of a man who had not cooked a meal in some number of years, and then watched him open cabinets anyway, and then watched Amani drift over and stand next to him and peer into the cabinet with equal seriousness, and something happened in her chest that she did not have a language for yet. She went to the kitchen. The 3 of them made rice and eggs, which was what the cabinet offered. And it took longer than it should have because Amani needed to be involved in every step at a level of involvement that was not technically efficient, but was completely non-negotiable. Taehyun, to his evident surprise, appeared to understand this instinctively. He did not try to redirect her or manage her away from the process. He just slowed down and let her participate and handed her things that were safe to hand her and said yes when she made suggestions that were not obviously terrible. They ate at the safe house table with Taehyun's people arranged at a respectful distance, doing their best impression of people who were not also in the room. After, Amani fell asleep again, the excitement and the disrupted schedule landing on her simultaneously, and Zuri put her down in the small bedroom and came back out and closed the door. Taehyun was at the table alone. His people had repositioned outside. He had his phone in front of him, face down, and he was looking at nothing in particular, which meant he was thinking hard about something specific. She sat down. "The documentation," she said. "When is it complete?" 72 hours. My lawyers are in motion." He looked at her. "It's real. I'm not performing it." "I know." She paused. "I know because I watched you try to make eggs with a 3-year-old, and you didn't once look like a man who was performing anything." Something shifted in his face, almost a smile. "Not quite." "I burned the first one," he said. "I noticed." A silence that had a different quality than the ones before. Not the weight of things unsaid. Something more like the particular quiet of 2 people who have said most of what needed saying and are sitting inside the result. "Where do we go from here?" she said. "Practically. Tonight. This week. You can go back to the apartment tomorrow. It's clear. I'll have people on the building until the documentation is complete. After that, there's no reason for surveillance." He paused. "I'll find somewhere else to stay. I'm not assuming—" "I know you're not assuming." She looked at the table. "I'll think about what I want to offer, and I'll tell you when I've thought about it. That's all I can say right now." "That's enough." "It might not look like what you're hoping for." "I know." She looked at him. She thought about 3 years and a letter in a drawer and a woman's laugh in a Seoul hotel room and a quartz rock placed in a large careful hand and eggs burned in a safe house kitchen while a 3-year-old supervised. She thought about all the distance between those things and what it meant that she was sitting inside all of them simultaneously. "You're going to need something to do," she said, "when it's done, when the structure is gone. You're going to be a man with no occupation and significant amounts of time and a daughter who has opinions about everything." She held his gaze. "You're going to need to figure out who you are when you're not running something." "Yes." He didn't flinch from it. "That's not a small thing." "No," he said. "It isn't." She nodded. She pushed back from the table and stood and stretched the tension out of her back, which had been held in one shape for approximately 7 hours. And she was very tired in the bone-deep specific way of someone who has been afraid for a long time and is only now beginning to realize how much energy fear takes. She was halfway to the bedroom when his voice stopped her. "Zuri?" She turned. He was still sitting at the table. He looked, for the first time since she had known him, since the very beginning, since the first gallery dinner where she'd watched him occupy a room like a controlled weather event. He looked simply like a person, not contained or governed or performing the specific authority she'd always known him through. Just a man, in a kitchen, tired in the same way she was tired, with the particular uncertainty of someone standing at the far edge of everything he used to be. "Thank you," he said, "for not leaving when you could have." She looked at him for a moment. "I left once," she said. "It cost us 3 years." She paused. "I'm not interested in what it costs us next time." She went to check on her daughter. Behind her, in the safe house kitchen, she heard Tae-hyun exhale, long, quiet, the specific release of a man who has been holding something for much longer than was sustainable, finally, at the very edge of a life he'd spent decades building, and was now in the process of willingly laying down, beginning to let it go. The documentation was transmitted at 11:17 the following morning, verified by 3 separate legal entities across 2 jurisdictions, and by noon of that day Kang Tae-hyun was, for the first time in his adult life, a man who controlled nothing beyond himself. Park Sung-jin's confirmation came through at 12:43, clean, complete, no further contact. Tae-hyun looked at the confirmation on his phone for a long moment and then put the phone in his pocket and looked out the window of the safe house at the Lego street outside. The ordinary clamor of it, the traffic and the vendors and the particular relentless energy of a city that had never once arranged itself around his comfort. And Zuri watched him from across the room and saw the moment, specific and unrepeatable, when the thing he used to be finished falling away. He looked smaller, not weaker, smaller. The particular reduction of someone who has taken off something very heavy and is recalibrating to the feeling of their own unencumbered weight. He turned from the window. She was already looking at him. He opened his mouth to say something and she put her hand up, not stopping him, just asking for a moment. And he went still and waited, and she stood in the middle of the safe house main room, and she made herself look at all of it clearly. The man across from her, the child asleep in the next room, the documentation that had just transmitted, the empire that was gone, the 3 years that couldn't be given back, the letter she'd kept in a drawer, the marble floor, the laugh, the rock. All of it. She looked at all of it. Then she said, "Come back to the apartment. Not permanently. As a beginning." She held his gaze. "We figure out what beginning means as we go." He held her gaze for a moment that she counted in her pulse. "Yes," he said. Outside the window, Lagos made its noise, indifferent and continuous and entirely unbothered, while inside the room something that had been broken for 3 years began. Not healed, not restored, but something more honest than either. Begun again, from the actual beginning, with both people looking clearly at what they were starting. That was when Amani's door opened and she came out carrying Baba with the announcement that she needed a snack, and also that Baba needed one too. And the moment that had been about to resolve into something complete was instead redirected entirely into the logistics of what constituted an appropriate snack for both a 3-year-old and a stuffed elephant. And Tae-hyun, without hesitation, went to the kitchen cabinet and opened it and asked, with complete seriousness, what Baba preferred. Amani considered this at length. "Baba likes crackers," she said. "Then crackers," he said. Zuri stood in the doorway of the main room and watched this and felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for so long. She had stopped registering the tension of it, and she thought, this is the part nobody warns you about. Not the crisis, not the confrontation, not the moment of decision, but the moment after all of it, when the ordinary refuses to wait for you to be ready for it and simply arrives, crackers and elephants and all, and the only thing left to do is meet it. They went back to the apartment the next morning, not triumphantly, not with the particular relief of people who have survived something and want to mark it. They went back the way people go back to ordinary life after a crisis, quietly, practically, with the specific deflation of adrenaline that leaves everything slightly gray at the edges. Taehyun's 2 remaining people carried nothing because there was nothing to carry. Amani walked between the adults with Baba under her arm and her rock collection in the small bag Zuri had packed around it, and she went up the stairs without complaint and waited while Zuri unlocked the apartment door and pushed it open. The apartment was exactly as they'd left it. 2 coffee cups on the table, the laptop closed. The morning light coming through the window at the angle it always came at this hour, landing on the kitchen floor in the same rectangle it always made. Amani walked in, assessed the situation, and went directly to her room. Zuri stood in the doorway for a moment and then went inside. Taehyun stopped at the threshold. "You don't have to stand there," she said, without turning around. She went to the kitchen and picked up the coffee cups and put them in the sink. "Come in or don't." He came in. He closed the door behind him. He stood in the kitchen doorway, the same doorway he'd stood in the morning she'd told him to leave, the morning after Hana's call, the morning she'd understood that careful had a ceiling. He looked at the apartment with the expression of someone taking an inventory that matters. "It feels different," he said. "You've been here before." "I know. It still feels different." He paused. "It feels like something I'm allowed to see now." She turned and looked at him. She was tired, genuinely tired, the bone kind, the kind that sleep doesn't fully address. And she didn't have the energy to manage the distance she'd been maintaining between what she felt and what she showed. She looked at him, and she let him see the looking. "Sit down," she said. "I'll make coffee." He sat. She made coffee. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table that had held the USB drive, the documents, the map, the 6-hour wait, and now held 2 mugs in a morning that had nowhere urgent to be, and they talked. Not about the documentation or Park Sung-jin or what came next strategically. Just talked. The way they had not talked in 3 years, and possibly hadn't talked enough in the 3 years before that. She asked him things she'd never asked directly. He answered without managing the answers. He told her about the 3 years of looking. Not the logistics, the feeling of it. What it was like to tear apart a continent looking for someone who had left by choice. To understand slowly that the absence was chosen. To sit inside that understanding and have no recourse against it because he knew, at the level of honest reckoning, that he had given her reason to go. He told her about the war with Park Sung-jin that had expanded into the vacuum of his distraction. He told her about a night in Seoul, 8 months ago, when a photograph had landed on his desk, taken by one of his people, grainy, middle distance, showing a woman and a small child leaving a gallery in Lagos. And he had looked at the child's face and sat with it for 3 hours before he could move. She told him about the delivery room. Not Amani's birth itself, she'd processed that alone and it belonged to her, but the moment after, when the nurses had taken the baby to be weighed and she was lying there in the sudden quiet, and she had thought, for the first time since she'd left, that she might have made a mistake. Not that she'd been wrong to leave, she hadn't known she was wrong, and you could only work with what you knew, but that there was a difference between what she'd known and what was true, and she'd let the difference sit unclosed for 3 years because reopening it was more frightening than carrying it. He listened. He did not interrupt, and he did not fill the silences with reassurance, and she was more grateful for that than she could easily say. The weeks that followed were not smooth. She had not expected them to be, and she would have trusted them less if they had been. He found a furnished apartment 2 streets over, her suggestion, his agreement, and he was present without being a pressure. He came when she said come. He called before arriving. He asked every time whether today was a good day for a visit, and he accepted the answer without negotiation when the answer was no. There were days when it was no. Days when she woke up with the hotel room fully assembled behind her eyes, the specific quality of that laugh, and she needed the distance between them to be geographic as well as emotional. She told him this directly, once, and he heard it without recoiling from it, and she respected that more than she'd expected to. Amani, who had the instinctive logic of a child operating on information, she couldn't fully articulate, began calling him by a name she invented herself. Not father, not his given name. She called him T, with the calm authority of someone who has decided that the available options are insufficient and created a better one. He accepted this immediately and without comment, and it became the name everyone used without anyone deciding to use it, which was the exact way Amani had always operated. The work helped. Zuri had always known that about herself, that the work was not an escape from feeling but a structure inside which feeling became manageable. She took on a major acquisition project for a museum in Abuja, the kind of project that required sustained focus and multiple simultaneous relationships, and she threw herself into it with the particular energy of someone who has been frightened for a long time and is converting the adrenaline into something useful. She traveled twice, once to Abuja, once to Dakar, and both times Tai Hyun stayed with Amani, and both times she called at bedtime to talk to her daughter, and heard, in the background of the call, the particular sound of a man who had run a criminal empire doing something domestically chaotic and slightly incompetent. And both times she ended the call with something in her chest that she finally, on the second occasion, allowed herself to name. She was glad he was there, not resigned to it, not tolerating it. Glad, the specific, uncomplicated glad of someone who has looked at a thing honestly and found it good. She sat with that, and she let it be what it was. 3 months after the safe house, Adayeze came for dinner. Not unannounced this time, she called ahead, which meant she was being deliberate about something and wanted Zuri to have time to prepare for it. She arrived with food and the particular expression of a woman who has been watching a situation develop from a careful distance and has decided it is time to say something. Tai Hyun was there. He'd cooked, or attempted to, with the specific effortful concentration he brought to anything domestic, as if he were approaching an unfamiliar tactical problem and refused to be defeated by it. The kitchen had been in a certain amount of disorder when Adayez arrived, and Amani had been providing commentary on his technique with the unsolicited authority she'd developed in the safe house. And Zuri had been sitting at the kitchen table not helping because watching him navigate a situation he could not control through hierarchy was something she found, she had discovered, genuinely funny. Adayez looked at this. She looked at Zuri. She sat down next to her and leaned close and said very quietly, so only Zuri could hear, "You look different." "I'm tired," Zuri said. "No." Adayez shook her head. "Not that kind of different. You look like yourself." A pause. "You stopped looking like yourself about 3 years ago. And I didn't say anything because you were holding things together and I didn't want to add weight, but you look like yourself now." She paused again. "I wanted you to know I noticed." Zuri looked at the kitchen. Tae Hyun had surrendered the spoon to Amani, which was either wisdom or tactical retreat, and was watching her stir something with the focused gravity of a 3-year-old who takes culinary responsibility extremely seriously. "He burned eggs the first time too," Zuri said. Adayez made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "How many times has he burned eggs?" 4. He's getting better. That's something." "It is," Zuri said. "It's a lot, actually." The dinner was not elegant. The food was imprecise and slightly overseasoned in one dish and underseasoned in another, and Amani knocked over her water cup and nobody made it into a crisis. And Adayez told a story about her brother that was so long and so convoluted that by the end of it nobody could fully remember what point it had started from. And Tae Hyun sat at the table in the middle of all of it with the expression of someone who is somewhere entirely new and is finding, to his considerable surprise, that he does not want to leave. After, when Amani was in bed and Adayeze had gone home and the dishes were done, Tai Hyun had insisted on the dishes, another habit he'd apparently decided to acquire. Zuri found him standing at the kitchen window in the dark, looking at the street below. She stood next to him. "What are you thinking about?" she said. She had started asking this directly, recently. It was a practice. He was still learning to answer it without first deciding whether the answer was appropriate for sharing. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm thinking I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "This." He gestured slightly. The apartment, the street, the dishes drying in the rack. The ordinary of it. I keep waiting for it to require something I know how to do, and it doesn't. It requires things I've never had to learn. He paused. "I'm not complaining. Another pause. "I'm telling you so you understand what you're watching." She looked at him. At the profile of him in the dark, the window light from the street below. "I know what I'm watching," she said. "I've been watching it for 4 months. And you're doing better than you think." She paused. "The eggs are evidence." A small sound that was, for Tae Hyun, the equivalent of a full laugh. She looked at the street. A man was walking below with a dog. A motorcycle went past. 2 women were talking on the corner with the gesturing hands of people in the middle of a good story. "I want to tell you something," she said. "I've been deciding whether to say it for a few weeks, and I've decided to say it." He turned slightly toward her. "When I left Seoul," she said, "I told myself a story about what happened. I told it clearly, and I believed it completely, and I lived inside it for 3 years. And the story was wrong, Not wrong about the fact that I was in pain, not wrong about the fact that I was protecting Amani, but wrong about the picture I was protecting her from. She kept her eyes on the street. I need to say that out loud. That I made a decision without the full picture, and I held on to it after the full picture became available, because revising it was frightening. I'm not asking you to minimize what the hotel room was. It was staged, and it was aimed at me, and it was brutal. But I made choices. She stopped, started again. I need you to hear me say that. He was quiet for a moment. I hear you, he said. I'm not asking you to. Zuri. His voice was quiet and direct. I hear you, and I need you to hear this. You protected our daughter. You did what you could see to do with what you had. The rest of it, the letter, the copies. I should have found a way to make sure you received what I sent. That was my failure. I let you disappear because I told myself you needed time, and the truth was, I didn't know how to go after someone I'd failed without failing them again. He paused. We both made it harder than it needed to be. I know my part in that. She turned and looked at him. We're going to keep having these conversations, she said, for a long time. Things are going to come up, and we're going to have to say them out loud instead of filing them. I know. You're bad at that, historically. I'm aware. I'm telling you because I need you to know I know, and I'm going to hold you to it anyway. She held his gaze. This doesn't work if you manage me. Not again. Not again, he said. She believed him, not completely, not with the total confidence she might have felt at 28 before any of this. She was too old for total confidence now, and too honest to fake it. She believed him the way you believe someone who has put skin in the game. Imperfectly, conditionally, with her eyes open. That was enough. That was the honest version of enough. The ceremony happened on a Saturday in March, 8 months after the safe house. Not a wedding. They were still married, technically. The documentation on that had never been filed, and Zuri had decided at some point in the previous months that she wanted to keep it rather than formalize it again, that the existing thing was sufficient, and she didn't need a new ceremony to legitimize what was being rebuilt. What they had instead was simpler. She had asked Adaeze to gather the people who mattered, and they had gone to a beach 2 hours from Lagos, just coastline, just the Atlantic, just an overcast Saturday with the particular gray-green light that came off West African water when the sky was low. And they had stood on the sand with Adaeze and her brother and the midwife who had delivered Amani and 2 of Zuri's gallery colleagues who had become genuine friends, and they had said things. Not vows in the formal sense. Things. True things, the kind that had been earned and were harder to say because of it. Zuri went first because she had decided she would not let herself defer on this. She said, I spent 3 years being certain I knew what happened. Certainty was how I protected myself. It worked until it didn't, and then I had to learn something I wasn't sure I could learn. How to hold 2 things at once that both feel true. That I was right to go and wrong about why. That I protected our daughter and underestimated her father. That loving someone doesn't mean you know them completely, and knowing someone doesn't mean you understand what they're capable of becoming. She looked at him. I don't know who you are yet. I know who you've been, and I know who you're trying to become. And I know that those are different things. But I'm here for the becoming. I want to watch it. I want to be the person you talk to when you don't know how to do the ordinary of it. She stopped. She breathed. That's what I have. I'm not going to dress it up. He was quiet for a moment after she finished. The water was loud behind her. Amani was sitting cross-legged on a blanket 5 feet away, going through the rock collection she'd brought in a small bag because she never went anywhere without the option of rock collection. And Adaez was sitting next to her, maintaining a respectful supervision. He said, I had power for a long time, the kind that makes people step back when you enter a room, the kind that gets things done through fear when they won't get done through reason. And I believed for most of my adult life that the things I built with that power were worth the cost. He paused. I know differently now, not because I lost them. I chose to give them up, and I'd choose it again this morning, but because I know now what they cost people who weren't in the room when the decisions were made. You, Amani, the marriage I had and didn't know how to hold. He looked at her steadily. I don't have anything to offer you that's equivalent to what I used to be able to offer. No empire, no protection infrastructure, no resources beyond what I've held personally. What I have is this. I have learned, at some cost, what matters. I'm not going to learn it again. I'm going to live inside it instead. He stopped. That's what I have. I'm not going to dress it up either. Adayez made a sound behind them that she converted, admirably, into a cough. Amani looked up from her rocks. Are you done? Yes, Zuri said. Can we go in the water? In a minute. Amani went back to the rocks. Zuri looked at Taehyun. He looked back at her. Neither of them was crying, which was a function of character rather than insufficient feeling, and she thought, this is accurate. This is us. Imperfect and not performing, standing on a beach in overcast light telling the truth without embellishment and letting that be the ceremony. She reached out and touched the dragon tattoo. Through the collar of his shirt, just the outline of it, just her fingers against the fabric over the place she knew it was. He went very still. She had touched it before. On the wedding night she'd traced it while he slept, the same wedding night that had become a fixed reference point for everything that came after. She'd touched it then because it fascinated her, this permanent thing, this mark of a world she'd chosen to marry into and never fully entered. This symbol that had been photographed and documented and pointed at as evidence of everything he was. She touched it now because it was his, just his. Not evidence of anything except that he was a person who had lived a life and carried it on his body, the way everyone carries their life somewhere, visible or not. It's the same, she said. Yes. What does it mean? I never asked you directly. He looked at her for a moment. My grandfather had it first. In his generation, it meant something specific. Loyalty to the organization, proof of belonging. He paused. I had it done because he had it. Not because I believed in what it meant to him, because I wanted the connection. Another pause. I've thought about removing it. Twice in the last 6 months. Don't, she said. He raised his eyebrows slightly. It's yours, she said. What it meant to him doesn't have to be what it means to you. Things change meaning when they're carried through enough time. She withdrew her hand. Let it mean something different. He held her gaze. All right, he said. Amani had materialized beside them with the particular silent efficiency of a child who has decided that adult conversations have gone on long enough, and the ocean represents a superior opportunity. She took Zuri's hand and then, after a moment of assessment that Zuri watched happen in real time, she took Taehyun's hand too and pulled both of them toward the water with the total authority of a 4-year-old who has already made the decision for everyone. They went. The water was cold. Amani shrieked at it and then stood in the shallows with the water around her ankles and laughed the way children laugh when cold water surprises them. Full, involuntary, the whole body involved. Zuri stood next to her and watched the waves come in and felt the sand shift under her feet with each receding pull, that unstable, trustworthy shifting that you can either resist or move with. She moved with it. Taehyun stood on her other side. The three of them in a line in the shallows, the gray-green Atlantic coming and going around their feet, Amani laughing at the cold of it, the overcast sky making everything honest and unheroic and exactly as large as it actually was. She did not need it to be more than this. This was already more than she'd thought she was going to get. The months moved. That was what months did, and she had learned in the previous 4 years not to fight the moving of them, but to inhabit them more fully instead. The gallery work expanded. She was offered a directorship of a new Lagos institution being built with international funding, which would be the largest of its kind in West Africa, and which she accepted with the particular combination of terror and conviction that she'd learned to recognize as the feeling of the right thing. She hired 3 people. She traveled more. She built a professional life that was genuinely hers, built on her name and her relationships and the work she'd spent a decade doing, and there was a specific satisfaction in that which required no comparison to anything else to be complete. Taehyun learned things. This was not metaphorical. He approached ordinary life the way he had apparently approached everything in his previous existence, which was to identify the gap in his competence and address it with sustained focus until the gap closed. He cooked, imperfectly at first and then with increasing reliability. He drove Amani to school, which required the negotiation of Lagos traffic in a personal vehicle without a driver, which he found, she gathered, both maddening and clarifying. He painted. This was unexpected, and she hadn't asked where it came from, just watched it develop from something tentative in the first month to something he spent 2 or 3 hours at on weekend mornings while Amani sat nearby doing her own art, which consisted of elaborate rock arrangements documented in drawings. He was not good at painting, initially. He did not seem bothered by this in the way she might have expected someone with his history of competence to be bothered. He just kept doing it with the same focused consistency, and by the 8th month the work had found something, not technically accomplished, but honest in the way things become honest when you've stopped trying to control the outcome and just kept going. She had put one of his paintings in the apartment, on the kitchen wall where the morning light hit it. He hadn't said anything when he saw it there. He'd looked at it for a moment and then gone to make coffee, and she'd watched his back from the kitchen table and noted the way his shoulders had shifted, and that was the end of that conversation. The conversation she did not expect happened on a Tuesday afternoon in the apartment's 2nd year of being theirs. She had stopped calling it her apartment internally, noticed the change without marking it formally, let it be what it was. When her phone rang, and she looked at the screen and saw a Seoul number she didn't recognize. She answered. The voice was Park Jisoo. Zuri stood very still in the middle of her living room and felt the quality of the air change. I'm calling, Jisoo said, in English that was careful and precise, because I need to say something to you that I cannot say through anyone else. A pause. I won't ask you to receive it well. I'm asking you to receive it. Zuri said nothing. What I did, Jisoo said, was not about you. I need you to know that, not because it changes what happened. I know it doesn't. But because you spent 3 years believing my father and I targeted you because of who you were. We didn't. We targeted you because of who you were to him. Another pause. That's not a meaningful distinction from the damage side. I know that. But I needed to say it because Hana told me what she did, warning you. And I have been told that you have built something after all of it. And Her voice shifted into something less controlled. I didn't think that was possible. Zuri stood in her living room and felt the shape of this moment and decided deliberately how to inhabit it. Is Hana all right? She said. A brief silence. She is. She's out of this work. She's in Jeju now. A pause. She asks about you. Tell her I got her message, Zuri said. Tell her that's enough. All right. A silence opened up between Seoul and Lagos, full of everything that had happened in the space between them. I'm not going to tell you it's forgiven, Zuri said. I don't think that's mine to give unilaterally. Too much of what happened was his. She paused. But I want you to know that what you destroyed, it's been rebuilt. Not the same thing, something better, I think, because we had to be honest to build it. She held the phone. You can go now. I don't mean that unkindly. Jisoo said, Thank you. The call ended. Zuri stood in the living room for a moment. Then she went to the window. Then she called Taehyun because she had promised complete information in both directions and she intended to keep it. He picked up on the second ring. Jisoo called me, she said. A pause. What did she say? She apologized. Zuri looked at the street below. I didn't forgive her. I didn't close the door all the way either. She paused. I thought you should know it happened. Yes, he said. Thank you. Are you still at the school? Amani's picking a rock from the garden. The teacher has given up trying to prevent it. Zuri felt something happen in her chest that was simple and complete. Let her have it. I already did. She smiled. She didn't announce the smile. She just let it happen on her face in the apartment alone, looking at the Lagos street, with nobody watching. Come home when she's done, she said. We'll be 20 minutes. She ended the call. She went to the kitchen and filled the kettle and put it on and looked at the painting on the wall. The one from the early period, imprecise and slightly overworked in the bottom right corner where he'd tried to fix something and made it more complicated. And she thought about what she'd told Jisoo, something better, because we had to be honest to build it. That was true. She believed it. Not as a consolation for the loss. The 3 years were not recoverable, and she wasn't going to reframe them as something that needed to happen. They were just years, just time, just the cost of things that went the way they went. But what had been built in the time since was built differently than what came before. Built with the lights on. Built with both people looking at what they were making and being willing to name it when it was wrong. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, the entire thing. The sound of the apartment door 2 weeks later, on a Sunday. Amani's shoes on the floor, abandoned immediately inside the threshold in the way she abandoned shoes everywhere and had never been successfully persuaded otherwise. Taehyun's voice saying something patient about shoes and hallways. Amani's voice returning something decisive about Baba not caring about shoes. Zuri was at her desk, and she turned around in her chair and leaned into the doorframe and watched them come in. The small person with the new rock already palmed in her hand, heading toward the collection with the focused purpose of someone completing an urgent errand. And the man behind her who moved differently now than he had 4 years ago, differently than he had in Seoul, differently even than he had in the safe house. He moved like someone who knew what room he was in and had decided to be in it. He looked up and saw her watching. She said nothing. He said nothing. He came to the kitchen and she went back to her desk, and the apartment settled around them the way it settled on Sundays, full of its ordinary sounds. Amani narrating something to the rock collection, the kettle Zuri had forgotten she'd put on. Beginning to whistle, someone's music from the building next door drifting through the window at the low, comfortable volume of a neighbor's afternoon. She heard him take the kettle off the heat. She heard him get 2 mugs. She turned back to her work, and the afternoon moved around her the way afternoons move when they aren't required to be anything other than themselves. And somewhere in the apartment, a 3-year-old was explaining, in the serious, decisive tone she used for matters of importance, the precise location and geological significance of a rock she had liberated from a school garden. And the man in the kitchen was making tea with the focused reliability of someone who has learned a small thing and intends to keep doing it right. And the sun came through the Lagos window at the angle it always came at this hour, landing on the kitchen floor in the rectangle it always made. And nothing about any of it was the life Zuri had planned at 31 when she'd boarded a flight to Seoul with an ultrasound photo against her heart. It was better, not easier, better. The distinction mattered. Easy was a thing you had before you knew what anything cost. Better was a thing you built after, with clear eyes and the specific courage of people who have looked at the worst version of something and decided to try again anyway. He brought her tea without being asked. He set it on the corner of her desk without interrupting what she was doing. He went back to the kitchen. She picked up the mug and held it with both hands, the way she always held things she needed the warmth of. And outside the window, the Atlantic light came off Lagos the way it did at this hour, low and direct and completely indifferent to how much had happened in the rooms it found. And she breathed, and the breath went all the way down, all the way to the bottom, without catching on anything. That was the whole story. Not the end of things. There was no end of things. That was the part nobody told you. Life was not structured for endings, but for continuance. But the place where the weight changed character, where it stopped being the weight of surviving something and became the weight of carrying something worth carrying. The dragon tattoo would stay. The empire was gone. The apartment smelled like tea and Sunday and the particular mineral scent of a rock that a 4-year-old had carried home in her palm because she'd decided it belonged with the others. Zuri went back to work. Outside, Lagos made its noise, and inside, her family made theirs. And the afternoon held all of it without difficulty, the way afternoons do when what's inside them is finally, honestly, the right thing.